So you can relive this experience on the library's YouTube channel. So let's get going. I'm going to let Debbie in here. I will read an official biography of Larry Schroeder that he and I agreed upon today. So listen up because it's pretty darn impressive. Larry Schroeder is a professor emeritus of public administration and international affairs at the Maxwell School at Syracuse University. He has more than 50, that is 50, years of experience teaching university level economics. He added a yikes in parentheses after that. Larry has conducted research on a variety of state and local government fiscal issues, both in the US and abroad. Much of his current research is directed at public finance issues arising in developing and transition economies. He has worked all over the world for organizations such as the United States Agency for International Development, the World Bank, and the United Nations Capital Development Fund. Most recently, Larry has been teaching economics classes online to students at Fudan University in Shanghai and the University of Hong Kong. Finally, full disclosure on my part, Larry is also my brother-in-law, and for that I am eternally grateful. So, because he puts up with my lovely sister, Rosemary, who's supposed to be here tonight, by the way, so I don't know what's going on. So, let's move on to Boom Bust Boom. And we have kind of some questions, but, you know, feel free to put your question in the chat, and Scott's going to help me kind of monitor those, or feel free to unmute. It's super casual and we can have a discussion of this wacky film that we all just watched. So overall, Larry, do you agree with the premise? It's the stated premise of the film that human nature drives the economy and there's crisis after crisis, time and time again. Is that accurate?
Well, I think that, yes, human nature has certain types of behaviors that when we have markets, you can end up in what is a totally undesirable situation. And, you know, well, for example, even in the front page of the Wall Street Journal today, when it's talking about one of the companies that I guess is involved in the trading of the Bitcoins and other cyber currencies, they've laid off 18% of their labor force because the price of Bitcoins is today or at least yesterday was 68% lower than it was at the height. So, you know, I don't think that we can ever totally get away from that kind of, unfortunately, we'll call it herd behavior. Mm-hmm. So, and by the way, since we're sort of talking about forecasting, I wanted to congratulate the library for choosing the June 15th to talk about macroeconomic issues at the same day that the Fed raises the federal funds rate by 0.75%. So that was quite the forecast.
Well, thank you. We'll take full credit for that. It was so expertly planned. So
that's right.
Yeah. No. So the movie kind of talks about, you know, like 3 different kind of topics, and one is history. And there's been a long history of financial crises, like with tulips and the South Sea Company and the Depression, obviously, and the 2008 crash. Bitcoin, like you just suggested. So have our tools for managing these bubbles improved any?
Oh, I suspect to some extent, but, you know, people, this idea of herd behavior, I'm afraid, is very deeply entrenched in individuals' minds, and they see that, well, the price of this particular good has continued to rise for the last, you know, X number of days or weeks or months. Therefore, I think I better buy today so that I can get into the gain. You know, for example, we have I'm not sure when they, I think it's a government policy that financial firms, you've probably read them yourself. You read through the, let's say, information from a particular financial firm, and it will include the statement that past performance does not guarantee anything about the future.
Mm-hmm.
And we all read it, and at the same time, probably kind of ignore it. So, I mean, that would be an example of, let's say, a government policy that's trying to reduce the amount of that type of behavior. But I'm not sure that it's that successful.
Yeah. Yeah. So they talked a lot about this guy, Hyman Minsky, and his financial instability hypothesis,
Yeah.
where financial traumas occur as a normal function of a capitalist economy, where there's this like we have a crash, and then the government steps in and imposes regulations, and then we get some stability, and then everybody gets overconfident. Then we have this financial euphoria, and then the regulations are relaxed, and then there's all this borrowing that's excessive, and then the instability comes back. So, I mean, what do you think of that? What's your thought on that? Is that accurate?
I think it's, it was never sort of mainstream economic thought, certainly not when I was a PhD student. Indeed, let me be upfront about this. The last macroeconomics courses that I were ever involved with was back in a PhD program in the late 1960s. So there is not a lot of, and my research has never really focused on monetary theory or macroeconomics per se. And in fact, Minsky, I think most of that writing occurred in the 1970s. So it really wasn't part of the, should we say, the economic literature, but probably also wasn't that, I don't think he was ever viewed, the same as some of the other monetary economists of that time. By the way, this isn't really part of the movie, but economists have for many, many years been interested in why do we have business cycles, and so. In fact, one of the interesting ones was an economist named Joseph Schumpeter, who ended up being an advisor to Minsky. I just learned today in his PhD program. But Schumpeter had the concept of destructive capitalism, that it requires for growth that you have innovation with new products coming on board, which then drives out the previous, products. I mean, the great example would be the automobile comes in, and carriages and using horses went out. But that led to some, also it led to economic growth. So there is definitely a lot of interest in, or has always been an interest in, the cyclical nature of capitalism.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So I know they made a big deal about the fact that we just keep ignoring Minsky's hypothesis, and I guess, I mean, what's your thought on that?
Well, I think that's probably correct, in the sense that, number one, I will admit up front, I've never read any of his writing in the degree to which he then tried to use empirical observations to support that hypothesis. Now, I think, by the way, I love the use of the puppets. And one of the great ones, John Kenneth Galbraith, that puppet is really right along what he looked like. And when I was seeing him, I was remembering, and by the way, you don't have the book in your library because I checked today.
Uh-oh.
But he wrote a book
Horrors.
called, well, what is discussed in the library, I mean, in the movie, is very much in line with what his book says with regard to why, let's say, it's called The Great Crash.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's just the Great Crash. And but then he goes into why there was the Great Crash, and then the banks failing as people became much less confident that their money would still be there. And then once the banks begin to collapse, then what do we get? Well, we get the unemployment, increases in unemployment, because firms are no longer producing as much. So it really led to that. Now, Minsky's probably, I don't know, I'm not sure when if he started. I think there was a great crash in 1890s or about then, and what happened between then and 1929, it might be that situation. And what we did after the Great Depression and the crash was try to come up with new institutions to stabilize the monetary system, but it didn't always work.
Yeah. Fun fact, do I have it right that when your last macroeconomics course you took was taught by Kamala Harris's father? Is that right?
Did. That is true.
So
Don Harris was probably just, probably 2 or 3 years older than me as a PhD student. But yeah, he taught a course in economic growth models, and it was a really bad course. So
which is why you're not a macroeconomics economist. Sorry.
I did learn how not to teach PhD courses.
Oh,
I think.
Yeah. So. All right. Well, and Scott put in the chat the name of that book, The Great Crash 1929 by John Kenneth Galbraith. So I will see if they can hunt that down for us so we can all study up.
Right.
Okay, so sort of the second theme of the movie was education. And to start this section off, Larry has provided a very insightful clip, which you may need to turn up your volume. Hopefully you will recognize the movie that this is from, which is Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And I'm going to blow up this. Oops, hang on. Sorry. My screen is not cooperating. There we go. I'm going to do this and then I will.
1930, the Republican-controlled House
You hear
of
that?
Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the the Great Depression, passed the a tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which raised or lowered raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer Curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics. Voodoo economics.
All right. Let's bring back memories, Larry.
There have been so many times that I've stood in front of classes and asked questions and hear myself say, anyone? But then my reaction is instead I'll just say, well, Scott, tell me, what is your answer to the question? Because I'm not just going to continue saying anyone. But yes, but I'm sure that there have been a number of people with similar levels of facial expressions and their eyes, shutting. In fact, in my mind, one of the worst parts of teaching online is that you can't see the students' eyes very well.
Yeah.
And you can't tell when they're totally asleep or totally unengaged, or they have no idea what you're talking about. In the classroom, you can usually see that, but you can't online.
That's great. Well, so as a kind of the link between the history and the education part, so is it, I mean, how much financial history is taught as part of a university curriculum in economics?
Not a lot of financial history. I mean, one of the things that, and they kind of imply it, and I definitely agree, in part because back when I was a PhD student as well as a master's student, we had to take economic history. It was a required course. Similarly, history of economic thought was a required course. So you learned about some of the theories that went before. But I think for the most part, PhD programs these days do not require it. Now, at the undergraduate level, I think many departments will have someone who will be teaching a history of economic thought, at least, or maybe an economic history course. It kind of depends on the interest of the faculty, but probably not required as a course.
Huh. Okay. And also, is it true that like they commented in the movie that universities mostly teach the neoclassical economic model, and that doesn't take into account the irrational behavior of people when it comes to money? So what's your thought on that?
I concur.
No.
I mean, well, yeah, the neoclassical model, again, I think you need to kind of differentiate the macro and the micro. The micro side definitely is sort of the basic operation of markets. Why do markets behave as they do? And included in that kind of analysis, although it's very hard to, let's say, empirically indicate why it's happening, you include expectations, expectations of producers as to what might be happening. I mean, for example, I'm sure that there are, well, it's a little late in the year, but there were farmers in Kansas or throughout the Midwest back in February and March were deciding, well, what should I plant more soybeans, or should I plant more wheat, or should I plant more corn, based on their expectations as to what might be happening. Same way with consumers. Well, indeed, if we want to talk about inflation, one of the issues that people in this session this evening may be even thinking about is, if my grandkids' Christmas presents, I have a good idea what I want to get them for Christmas. If I expect inflation to continue and prices continuing to go up real quickly, I should buy today rather than wait until November. So your expectations can influence your behavior. But of course, if everybody thinks the same way, it drives the price of those toys up even more rapidly. So so that can be brought into the analysis. On the macro side, I think it's much more let's say much more difficult to again try to incorporate those kind of factors in the analysis. But again, if we want to, we can kind of maybe people are as interested in today as they are in what happened in the past. You know, it was about a year ago, a not so, well, let's say a good economist, but he has pretty bad reputation as president of Harvard, Larry Summers, was arguing a year ago that given the policies of the Biden government as well as the Fed, we're going to have inflation. And so, you know, his predictions, they were poo-pooed at the time, but I think he was on target given what we're seeing today. So I don't know that really certainly doesn't necessarily answer how the neoclassical model it's still being taught. You know, one of the real difficulties in trying to call it model behavior is to try to incorporate irrational irrational behavior into the model, and that is well, let's say it certainly is something that I wouldn't know how to try to do.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a good change to sort of inject into how economics is taught, but I don't know how you do it.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, well, in fact, one of the people on that was interviewed there, Kahneman, who's the psychologist. He wrote the book Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, I think, or Thinking Slow, Thinking Fast. In other words, and basically, which is, by the way, is a fun book to read. And he tries to get into the idea, well, in fact, he even mentions this idea that our theory would suggest that a loss of a certain number of dollars or a gain of certain number of dollars, the equal number of dollars, should change our happiness or make us less happy in an equal way. But in fact, observing real behavior, people feel worse if they've lost the $10 than if they gained than the additional happiness that they gained from the additional $10. So that, I think, they're trying to incorporate some of that, which goes under the general heading of behavioral economics. And they're trying to get a little more of that. The thing is, if you're just going to teach the bulk of your undergraduate students for a semester or 2 semesters, it's going to be pretty hard to immediately get into those kinds of things.
Yeah. Well, so you and I talked about, and you brought up that the fact that the film did not address like the issue of efficiency versus equity. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I can. As I suggested to you, if I mean, I didn't agree with a lot of the stuff that was being discussed it was after the first 50 minutes, and they were talking about economic models and you know, how it was so terrible that they're assuming rationality and that all economists believe that everybody behaves rationally. I don't know of any economist who would say, oh, I believe that in fact everyone always behaves rationally. I mean, hell, I made an irrational decision when I bought that ice cream. You know, we all make irrational decisions. The problem with modeling is that it's very hard to try to get irrationality built in. But that was sort of an aside. One of the things, if I wanted to, but it's outside the theme of boom, bust, boom, is to talk about economic policy making and the fact that very commonly in economic, in public policy, there can be choices between economic efficiency and equity, that many kinds of choices, and economists focus most of our modeling on economic efficiency. Are the benefits that society receives from a particular policy greater than the costs? Because all policies have costs. And economists focus a lot on the costs of behavior. That same kind of modeling essentially ignores who are the beneficiaries and who are those that are bearing the burden of the costs. And they may be, they may be very, very different. But that becomes a fairness and equity issue. Economists are very good at measuring who the beneficiaries might be and who the burden bearers are. But the normative question as to whether that is good or bad is really outside the domain of economics. So it's definitely a weakness.
Yeah. Well, one part of the movie I thought was really interesting was the woman, Laurie Santos, who is from Yale, I think, and her research on Monkey Island that suggests that monkeys will make the same smart or bad decisions as people, and that these behaviors have been around for 35 million years, and we're never going to evolve. So how do you feel about that?
Oh, I think that's probably, I'm not very optimistic that people's behaviors, you try to encourage and you do things, well, for example, and again, this is coming from the Kahneman kind of theories and approaches. And in fact, it goes under the general heading of nudge-based policies. So you try to change your policies so that when individuals make choices, they kind of move in the direction that you hope that they would move. For example, it's included in his book and it's talked about a lot. Rather than when you get your driver's license, that you say that you are willing to donate parts of your body, the automatic, what it should be is that you automatically have agreed to do so unless you say that you don't want to, which then would probably lead to a much higher percentage of individuals who are going to be willing to make that kind of decision. So again, so you can probably alter individuals' behaviors, but there are going to be some pretty deep-seated beliefs or let's say behavioral, just behaviors that are not going to be that easy to change.
Yeah.
So.
Well, Scott had a
good.
Impressive comment in the chat. It says, economics, the dismal science. Love that. How can something we all care so much about and are so involved with on a daily basis just baffle us? I would agree with that.
Well, I'm not, number one, yes, it is a dismal science in the following sense, and I've run into it in classrooms many, many times, and that is the fact that economists always recognize that everything involves costs. I mean, you've all heard the term, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Well, there isn't. Somebody is paying for those resources. And so but that's the way economists think. You're trained to think about, well, what are the downsides? What are the costs associated with kinds of behavior, which makes it much less of a fun kind of thing. Hey, let's talk about all sorts of the benefits that can be obtained without thinking about what are the costs?
Mhm.
So it's kind of sad.
So if you can't change people's behavior, so then is changing the structure of the financial systems, going to help? Is that the
Okay,
answer?
well, yeah, that was another interesting part of the movie. They spend 50 minutes talking about all of these, had some really good ideas and then they didn't work. But then they spend 10 minutes saying, well, what we need to do is change the system. And then, I mean, it was almost as bad as the folks who said, well, now we have everything perfect and we shouldn't have to worry about, the collapse of a market. Well, yes, maybe they can change the system and it may work, but they can't ignore Minsky,
Yeah.
even though they've been arguing the importance of Minsky. So
Yeah.
I find that. Hey, can I ask a question of the group?
Sure.
Since given that probably most of you are younger than me, but you're still, over 60 or so. Let me ask, your parents, like my parents, went through the Great Depression. Do you think that experience led them to alter their behaviors with respect to investments and things like that, taking risks? I would love to hear stories.
Yeah, lots of head nodding. Yeah. Amy, do you want to comment on that? You need to unmute yourself.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We're both saying we're unmuted. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like CDs, no stocks, everything secure, safe, have the cash in hand.
And my father, if he said it once, said it 1,000 times. I'm only going to invest in things I understand.
Yeah.
I don't understand stocks. I'm not going to put any money in them. And it was a mantra.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good piece of advice to go by, though. Yeah. How about you, Shelley?
Mine went by almost the opposite, and they both came through it. Certainly there was a frugality that I think that generation had, because you didn't waste anything. But my father bought each of his children a share of stock when we were a child. And I grew up getting those little, 50-cent a check for 50 cents every quarter on a dividend. And my mom has established each of us with a savings account as a child, which we didn't get the passbook until we were older, but we were expected to save and to invest and to work hard.
Yeah.
And I think that definitely came out of the Depression.
Yeah.
And they,
Well, and credit cards were evil. I got that lecture from my dad. So it only worked for a while.
And I want to say that one of the first things my mom said, as when I was late teens, when I had a chance, go ahead and take out one loan to establish your credit and keep good credit all your life. And that was, an important thing. So she, as long as you paid it off, it was fine.
Yeah.
But
right.
You better be able to pay it off.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Now it's yes, Scott.
Well, and you know this one, but my parents had two very different lessons from the Depression. The one who had the toughest road during the Depression completely missed the point and was quite the spendthrift, and the one who whose father had a garage in Topeka and managed things and did, managed to handle everything. She got the being very frugal, but it was just this constant. I think my dad was unleashed from, oh, there is money, or it seems like there's money. So there is a really interesting dynamic. I'm not sure what message I was supposed to get from that.
Yeah.
But
no, it's interesting, money behaviors, how it can really
Well,
affect things.
Well, exactly. And again, there have been discussions about the, either our kids or our grandkids, depending on your generational choices, may have lived through a long period of time. For example, they lived from the say the 1960s through the 70s, 80s, and then they got into the 2000s, and oh my gosh, look at houses. The value of houses continued to go up and up and up. That must be where they will continue to go. The past behavior of prices are predictive of what they're going to be in the future. Well, not necessarily. But the fact that they had not experienced anything like that, I think can definitely alter people's behavior. The same thing, I was thinking about it today. When I bought a house, this would have been in the late 1970s. I think I paid 11 or 12% mortgage interest on a 30-year loan. And I was actually looking at some numbers. By 82, it was up to 18%.
Wow.
Now, can you imagine buying a house? But the kids who are now maybe at home buying age, they've never seen, well, in fact, they may think that mortgage rates are always going to be between 3 and at most 4.5%. Well, it could go much, much, much higher.
Yeah.
So your behavior and your view of, let's say, the markets is based in part on your own experiences. As our parents, I think it's interesting may have reacted differently to experiencing the Depression.
Yeah, I have a comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, my dad worked for General Electric, and he was in World War II. So his two big investments were General Electric and savings bonds. But my question really is, I see that these big mergers move massive amounts of money with no product. Is that good or bad for the economy?
Well, I think you mean that there's a huge amount of money transferred from one group to another
with no physical product.
There's no physical product, and it's hard. I will admit it's hard for me to see that is really leading to let's say an improvement in the overall economic situation of the society. But somebody was willing to sell and somebody was willing to buy. I guess they have again, they may be making incorrect expectations as to what might happen 2-3 years down the road. They may hit it off right, or they may have made an error. Now, I would never want to argue that we should reduce entirely the amount of risk that individuals are allowed to take, because part of a vibrant economy is that individuals are willing to, hey, I think I might be able to make additional money if I open up this small business on Mass Street. And you get that kind of change, which is is part of the capital system. Now, what you're speaking about is definitely way outside that arena, and probably hasn't really created any additional jobs, created any additional employment, and in fact may end up, where there have been these takeovers, and the takeover agent basically closes down the operation, which is, in my mind, counterproductive.
Thank you.
Yeah, and this is actually pertinent to today's activity with the Fed raising interest rates and the current economic situation. Maggie and Dave was asking, how much do politics affect our economy? Dave said, oh, she asked this question of her husband, son, and grandson. Dave, her husband, said very much. Our son said only partly, and grandson said none at all. So I guess it all depends on your perspective, but how do people feel about that? Do politics affect our economy?
Yeah, here's
Shelley.
Shelley, yeah, sorry.
I would say definitely some. I'd say partly it's not terribly controlling, but I would like to point out that I think it was probably after this documentary was made, I think it was a Republican-led Congress relaxed the banking restrictive banking regulations that had been put in after 2008, and so we can have another boom again.
Yeah.
And another bubble.
Right. And by the way, the
Minsky.
well,
Minsky back again.
No, exactly. And my understanding is I'm not sure what his title is going to be. The Senate just recently, just a week or so ago, actually, he was former dean of the Ford School at Michigan, and he is going to try to increase the amount of regulations in the financial sector that were reduced certainly under the Trump administration. And I would argue, yes, the politics definitely play a role. Now, it may be the political decisions are being reached in a very rational way. I think, indeed, even the Secretary of Treasury, as well as the head of the Fed, have just in the last couple of weeks admitted that the decisions that the Biden administration made with the last of the COVID relief packages that was passed just, I guess it was first quarter of last year, which added additional money to the economy. The feds were still trying to promote employment under the expectation that because of the pandemic, the economy is going to go down, so we want to stimulate. Well, but they've overstimulated, and one of the real, and in part, it was politics. It was politics. The Biden administration really wanted this additional money to go out there to make people better off. Unfortunately, some of that money was simply being put away, and then you had a collapse both on the supply side, with the supply chain has been broken in a variety of ways, and you had increase in demand as the pandemic tended to decrease, at least in the States. So you get increase in demand, a lowering of supply. What do we expect as economists? Well, we would expect prices to go up, and that's what they've done. And in part, I think it was politics that led to that.
Well, one thing I was just curious to get everybody's reaction on, just the general delivery of the information in the movie. I mean, was the use of puppets effective? Yeah.
Can I speak to that?
Sure, absolutely.
I go semi-comatose when even someone as dear as Larry begins to talk economics at me. because apparently I was quite bright in math, and then they introduced, I don't know, arithmetic in second grade. Ever since then, it's a nightmare. So I absolutely adored it because, first of all, I was used to the Monty Python group, and this is very much like the graphics, other than some of the puppets, the graphics and ideas that these brilliant men put together. And this one is a particularly bright guy, and Terry does incredible graphic stuff. So having said that, I think it appeared both to the audio enhanced who could take the drone of economic theory, and then the object-oriented person who needs to see a puppet or an illustration in order
Or
to
a South
learn.
Park clip.
Yeah, and I think they did a fairly decent job because you know, some of the things we haven't discussed. An economic degree isn't worth the paper it's printed on. You know, that it's basically Fantasia that we're talking about right now. These are all things that he's put forth that I thought were really quite wonderful.
Yeah. Shelley, did you have a comment?
As an economic major, I wanted to point out, I think that actually college is too late. I think this should be required watching for every high school junior right around there, that they ought to get exposed to this very early, whether or not they're going to be in college, because yeah, and I love the puppetry. They're going to be react to it. I mean, it's half Monty Python and half Sesame Street, and that'll be right up their alley. And I think they would absorb a lot at that age,
Yeah.
which even now people are not necessarily paying attention to.
Yeah, there's a whole little like flashcard curriculum online for that is associated with this movie. So you too can Google the movie and quiz yourself with flashcards and see how much you remember. And my main question, I have been stewing on this now ever since I watched that movie, is what in the world was John Cusack doing in this movie? Oh my God. And I like John Cusack, I really do, but it's like, well, other than stating, let's throw rotten fruit at an economics professor, Larry.
Well,
Wait, what was his point?
I will admit, I checked Google Scholar.
Okay.
I went to Google Scholar today, and I didn't find any of his writings in any of the economic journals. I looked at a variety of universities and their economics departments to see if he's a professor at any of them. Didn't find that. So I figured that because he isn't a professor, he's willing to say something about urinating on professors. What the? I mean, my goodness. I guess there are worse, more dramatic things that could be done, but I didn't really appreciate that.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, his take, I can, you know, by the way, there's, for example, I can't remember his first name, Schiller, is interviewed very briefly, and you know, he talks about the Fed's actions in before the crash in 2008. But Schiller is a very good economist. Indeed, he's probably made a lot of money. If you look at the so-called Schiller Housing Price Index, he's the one who came up with that. And so he probably gets a good amount of royalties every year from that. So, I mean, he's a very, very good economist. At the same point, he recognizes that the Fed was making some really bad decisions in 2006, 2007 that led them to the collapse in 2008.
Wow. Well, I guess all sorts of perspectives, huh, between John Cusack and Mr. Schiller or Dr. Schiller.
Yeah.
So we always do this. What does everybody rate the movie at? You can it from a range of 1 to 5, 1 being it's not very good and 5 being great. You can hold up your hand and vote. Yeah, I think I'll give it a, ooh, look at that. We got some 5s, we got some 4s. Man, well, I think overall it was well received. Yeah, no, I thought it was fun. It was, I think Maggie had a great comment. I like being able to laugh at the economy. I agree with that completely. It was, I mean, I remember taking my economics course as part of the journalism curriculum, and I wish I had had this movie to watch and learn from, because the puppets were helpful. So with that, we're getting close to 8 o'clock, but I did want to announce our next dessert in a movie, and this will thrill all of you because it's on a different date. It's July 13th at 7 o'clock. So we flipped wine and the movie for next month because of the availability of of Steve, our wine guy. But inspired by our recent trip to the Evel Knievel Museum, there is I see Mary doubling over in laughter. There is a documentary on Canopy called Being Evil. That would be EVEL, all about Evel Knievel. And guess who is our special guest? Carrie Miller, the guy at the front desk. So you will not want to miss it. I guarantee. Carrie is a character. That is an understatement. And I don't know how much we'll learn about Evel Knievel, but it will be really, really fun to hear carry on about all things Evel Knievel Museum. So put that on your calendar, July 13th at 7 o'clock, and study up on, motorcycle daredevils. It'll be fun. Something appropriate for the summer, right? So. All right. And with that, any further comments, suggestions, anything like that?
I just wanted to say that John Cusack was the nice everyman. I'm not an economic expert.
There you go. No, Scott will tell you I had a massive crush on John Cusack. So it was like, I don't understand this.
I wanted to comment on the fact that my father about every week told about how the government keeps printing money. And, what you could get for 20 cents now, you pay $20 for.
Yep.
And now my husband does that. Where did I go wrong?
I think Milton Friedman would say, if you print money and give it away, you're going to have inflation. And nobody has really talked a lot about Milton Friedman lately, but they printed a lot of money and gave it away.
Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to also say that Bill Belichick and Bill James are both economists, and they're kind of exciting guys if you watch Bill Belichick on the sideline.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, that's right. We should get Bill James in here to talk baseball for us. That would be fun. So, all right. Well, it is 8 o'clock. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us.
Can we applaud?
Really appreciate it. Oh, yes. Everybody applaud for Larry. Yay, Larry.
Thanks for coming on.
Yes, it was
Thank you.
awesome. No, it was really, really great. We really appreciate it.
Okay.
So, all right. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Bye.
you.